So much for joining us, everybody. Really excited for today's conversation. I'm going to wait just a second for people to come in from the waiting room before we get started. But really excited for today's conversation and our content today. I am joined by this amazing panel. So welcome. We're here to talk really about the transformative power of an MBA, and I'm going to do that through an amazing panel of MBA alums today. So my name is Ashley. I'm the director of pre-MBA programs here at Forté, which means I get to oversee all the programming for candidates like yourself that are on their journey to their MBA. I'm going to take just a minute or two before we dive into content to talk about the work that we do here at Forté. If you're new to Forté, we are a nonprofit organization all about changing the balance of power in the workplace. If you are a woman in business, we are excited to have you here in our network. We are a powerful alliance of undergraduate and graduate business schools, amazing women like yourself, pioneering donors, amazing corporate partners, and we've been around for a little over 20 years now. Here at Forté, we're all about helping you reimagine what's possible in your career and certainly through business school. Absolutely helping you accelerate your career. We're going to talk a lot about career today, actually, and how the MBA can have an impact on that. We do that also through our amazing business school partners. So our business school partners support us through content like events today, and also through providing financial support for candidates who align with the mission of Forté. So our amazing partner organizations do support the Forté Fellows Program, meaning they have specific scholarship dollars set aside for candidates who support the mission of Forté. We do work with over 60 full-time MBA partner programs in the US, Canada, the UK, and Europe. So no matter where you're looking, there's probably a partner school that's supporting the work that we do. We have events like this event today that are free. We are heading into kind of a little quieter summertime, but we do have one more event in May that I want to plug. One of our panelists today is from one of our European partner schools. So if you're thinking you'd like to attend a program in the UK or Europe, please join us next week for a webinar to talk about that. I also want to let you know, if you are in the application process to business school, you're thinking you might want to apply in the fall, we do have our flagship prep program, MBA Launch. We have an on-demand version of that program that's open now. You can check it out. Kind of everything you need to know about the application process to business school, help you on your journey to submitting a great application. The next enrollment deadline is at the end of the month. Finally, big thank you to our supporting schools today, our sponsors, IMD, Vanderbilt Owen, Georgia Tech Scheller, and Simon Rochester. So big thank you to them for making the programming that we do today possible and throughout the year. If you have any questions as we go through, feel free to let us know. So if you have questions after today, feel free to send us a note. Otherwise, we will have some time at the end of our conversation for questions. So if you're thinking, man, I just have a burning question for these panelists, please use that Q&A function here in Zoom, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. So with that, I kept it pretty short. I am going to kick off our panel. So here's how we'll spend our time today. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves so you know who we're talking with. They'll share where they work, where they went to school. Then I'm going to dive into some questions that I have prearranged for them. So we'll talk about their background, their MBA experiences, how the MBA has affected them professionally and personally. And then, as I said, we'll save some time for audience Q&A. We'll wrap up with some final advice and be done at the top of the hour. So hopefully that sounds like a good plan. As I said, we're going to kick it off with some short introductions. So I'll call on each of our panelists to share with us. Lexi, you're on my screen, so you're up first.
All right, my name is Lexi Hamasfar. Really excited to be here. I work at AT&T currently as a principal business technical manager, which is IT operations is what I do. But I went to Georgia Tech's Scheller School of Business.
Awesome. And Beatrice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beatrice. I'm from Brazil, born and raised. I'm an engineer and I started my career in healthcare 7 years ago in a leadership development program at Johnson & Johnson. So had the opportunity to work for all of those, the three organizations that they previously had, the Meditech, the pharma, and the consumer goods. And then decided to do my MBA at IMD Business School in Switzerland last year. So I recently graduated and now I'm currently working for Ipsen as a new product planning manager in the UK. So I work for pipeline, new launches for the commercial operations market.
Thank you. Healthy.
Hi, everyone. Kelsey Tabor, really excited to be here. Thanks for the time. I currently work as a senior associate in PwC's workforce transformation practice out of the New York City office. So that's where I'm living and working currently. And I received my MBA from Vanderbilt University's Owen School of Management, going on, I guess, 2 years now. It's flown by, but.
Great, thank you. And Catherine.
Hi guys, great to meet you today. My name's Catherine. I live in Los Angeles, California, and I just wrapped up 2.5 years as a vice president of brand licensing at Hello Sunshine, which is a media and production company founded by Reese Witherspoon, and am going off on my own for a few projects, more to come as I figure that out. But exciting new chapter. And I went to, I finished at the Simon. I'm frozen. There I am. I finished it, the Simon Business School at the University of Rochester in 2017. So I no longer feel like a young alum, but excited to be here with you guys today.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to ask each of you to go back in time with us and think about when you were in the shoes of our audience members, when you were considering an MBA. Love to hear about kind of your background before the MBA, what you did, and how you first considered an MBA, how you decided that it was right for you. So let's go in the order y'all just went in. So Lexi, I'm going to back to the top. Take us away.
Sure. So I used my MBA to make a hard pivot from journalism. I wanted to be an entertainment journalist, and I was out living in LA working for E! News at the time. And I started to get more interested in the business side of the industry. That kind of indicated to me that I maybe wanted to make a pivot in what I was doing for a career. But when I would look at really marketing roles, because that's what I thought I could pivot with my degree, I realized I didn't really understand what the job rec was saying. And so I wanted to have that educational grounding with an MBA to where I felt like I could successfully make a pivot, having all of the knowledge and being set up for success for that way. So that was what ultimately led me to go get my MBA, was that desire to have the educational background of business. I didn't have it as a minor or a double major from undergrad, and so that was really important to me.
Awesome. And Beatrice, you kind of touched on this, that you did a LDP program. So how did you kind of decide the MBA was the right choice?
Yeah, so for me, it's funny because, as I said, I'm an engineer, and then the LDT program that I started was in supply chain, and then suddenly I hear he received this opportunity at J&J to start working with CAR T-cell therapy, more like in the commercial part, and then I was just like this engineer with a lot of like supply chain knowledge, but looking around the people who were working with me in commercial, I needed something different, and also like growing in the organization, getting more exposure to leadership roles. I felt that I needed something different. And then back then I worked for North America and Latin America, but I didn't have any European experience. And I really wanted to be like a more like global leader. So I also used my MBA to have this European exposure and then relocate myself to Europe for like a few years before going back to like Latin America or North America. So I kind of used that so I could shift my career from supply chain, more technical roles, to more leadership roles, and also in commercial. So now I'm also in a leadership development program. It's a 5-year career track with different rotations in Europe, but all focused in commercial, no longer supply chain. So definitely without that, I think it would be very hard for me to take those two career changes, location and also function.
Absolutely. Kelsey, what about you?
Yeah, so I went to undergrad at the University of Miami in Florida, where I studied public relations and advertising. I've always been really interested in communications and media, all of that good stuff. So upon graduating, I worked in the PR space for a couple of years. I then made a bit of a pivot into a media consultancy firm where I worked for some bigger named media and entertainment clients. And again, I think my undergrad experience had really equipped me with like those qualitative skills. Again, I was strong in communication, strong in PR, advertising, that creative space, but I felt like I needed to hone in on my more quantitative skills. So I think that's what really motivated me to get my MBA. I felt like that was kind of the best path to bridge that gap. And I'm sure for the rest of the women on the panel, COVID was a pretty transformative time. For me, I was entering, I think, year 5 of my professional career. So it kind of, COVID occurring, I think, caused me to kind of look at my career progression, look at where I wanted to be. And for me, that like 5-year mark was really the right time for me to pivot and start focusing in on that quantitative component. And getting an MBA felt like the right opportunity to do that.
Catherine, what about you? You're on mute.
There we go. Not dissimilar from Kelsey. I was very liberal arts undergrad. I went to the University of Rochester for my undergrad in political science and film and media studies. And I was also a really serious athlete. And so after college, I actually took an opportunity to coach at the collegiate level. So pre-MBA, I was a field hockey coach and was still young in my early and mid 20s, and was always, when I was at the University of Rochester, was always like looking at the Simon Business School at the end of the quad, like, what is going on there? I think that like the people that are walking around there seem really interesting to me. And so the first curiosity was just like really from a place of what do I want to be when I grow up? And I was like, I want to learn that, which felt pretty abstract, but then what was funny is I was into collegiate field hockey coaching. I was thinking about a couple different graduate school paths and then looked at a 1-year marketing master's at Simon. The other thing that happened for me while I was coaching in Boston, I was at Tufts University. I was working at Lululemon in the off season of the field hockey season. And that for me was the experience just working in a store. I fell in love with brand and consumer brand. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I was obsessed with, wow, these women come in here every week and want to know the new products. And then, so it's funny now, 8 years later, 10 years later, actually, geez, being at a media company that works on this business model of building community connected to the commerce model. So all that to say, that was a seed that was planted. That was my journey to, I really want to learn how this all works. What is this model of developing product and building a brand and building a really loyal community? So I applied to a 1-year marketing master's back at the University of Rochester, and so much and more to the admissions committee that interviewed me and in conversation was like, I actually think you could be a fit for the full-time MBA. And I was like, I'm not going to say no to that. That sounds amazing. And the truth is, I accepted that opportunity. A month later, I was at a Forté conference with the women that I was going to get my MBA with. And I didn't even have a suit showing up to that. And the women that I was in program with were like, all right, we're doing this. And so I think for me, it was following some curiosity and following just like this desire. I didn't have traditional experience in the business world before my MBA. But I was like, I want to learn that, and trusted the invitation to join. And so that was my journey to Simon and the amazing 2 years that it became.
Wonderful. You all had kind of a common thread, which was the MBA being this educational and transformational experience. So you were changing locations, you were changing industries, you were getting knowledge, whether that's business knowledge or knowledge about quantitative skills. So as you think about the experiences that you had during the MBA, I'd love to hear if there were some impactful experiences or really transformational experiences, whether or not they're related to what you said before, but what were really those experiences that made the MBA for you? And Kelsey, I'm going to pick on you first, if you don't mind. I know you mentioned quantitative skills. You don't have to talk about that, but what were those things that really made the MBA for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, again, because I had that 5 years of professional experience, I think I had the opportunity to enter business school at a time where I felt like I wanted to kind of almost start over, or it was almost like my second shot at bat in terms of getting an education and really getting the most out of that education, especially being more mature than I was when I started my undergrad experience. So one of the first things I did when I got to business school was I got involved on campus. And again, during undergrad, that wasn't something that I had focused as much on. So I saw business school again as my chance to kind of try those new things, and honestly give myself the opportunity to try and fail. I think you may hear that consistently on this panel, like MBA programs and business school in particular are really your opportunity to fail, and figure out how to fail. They always say fail forward. But during my time at Vanderbilt, I joined student government. I also served on the board of our Women in Business Association. And so that really gave me the opportunity to organize events from start to finish, while also getting like a much better sense of what kind of leadership style worked for me in terms of leaders I wanted to work with and what type of leader I also wanted to be. So again, that was a really good opportunity to try that. And some things went really well, others didn't. But that essentially was the point. I learned a lot just by being willing to step into those roles and figure out things essentially as I went. And I think in that experience of getting involved on campus, joining leadership opportunities, I learned to get comfortable being uncomfortable, especially when that outcome wasn't guaranteed or when there felt like there was a greater opportunity to fail. So I think having that experience was really transformative to me in my growth, professionally and personally.
I love that. Yeah, the idea that you can fail, right? There's a safety net in here, like where they want safety net. So it is great to have that experience. Who else wants to chime in on kind of like a transformational experience or impactful experience?
I can chime in. So I think for me, and I feel like this is probably something that can be echoed across, I think pretty much all of us pivoted. But when you do a pivot, an MBA is like groundbreaking and transformational. And I think an MBA is transformational in general, but for me, it was like literally life-changing, going from journalism to being able to understand business and things like finance and accounting that I never thought I'd be able to understand coming out of undergrad, to be totally honest. And so for me, one of the things that was really important when I was like looking for a school that stood out for Georgia Tech, my experience was the practicum part of the courses. And so what those are is you get partnered up with a company sponsor, and then you do kind of a challenge question, and you effectively consult for the company and then present at the end of the semester. And you can focus on a lot of different things. I did a data analytics one. We did an international practicum one where I got to go to China, which was incredible. And actually our first year strategy one is what led me to AT&T, because I worked with AT&T, and then I fostered that relationship with the sponsor over the summer and ramped up quickly for second year interviews. But I think to kind of piggyback off of what Kelsey said, don't be afraid to take the classes that may make you nervous. Like I took an advanced accounting class, which 10 years ago, I could say like, I never thought I would have taken, but take those classes that scare you. Keep an open mind as well. Like I said at the beginning, I thought I wanted to go in and do marketing, and now I'm in IT operations, and I love it, and I love customer experience and customer service. But I think I only would have gotten to this point had I tried all of those different classes while I was in MBA, because to Kelsey's point, you can try them, you can fail in them, you may find out that you love them and that's your true passion, but you don't really know that without keeping that open mind.
Yeah, I think I can come because it's very similar to the way you ended, Lexi. I think it's amazing. It's about like learning and exploring yourself as well. I have a feeling that during this year or more than a year, mine was a 1 year program. You have for the first time after like probably college, where you were still very young, the opportunity to look at yourself and understand who you are and understand who you want to be, which was super powerful during my MBA journey. So like at IMD, during our leadership classes, we also have coaches and PDE, like analysts, psychologists that are supporting us through the journey. So that for me was like my favorite experience, this self-awareness and turning everything that is like literally hindering my leadership potential into action. So one example, like I'm a 6-foot woman, very tall for a Brazilian, and then I always felt exposed when I'm presenting in public, little things. And then where is that coming from, right? How is that actually triggering me when I'm exposed physically, when I'm standing in front of a big audience? So in the beginning of the program, I was presenting to like a lot of people, and then I froze completely. And with those PDE sessions, I started understanding where is that coming from. And then we started addressing it. And then after a few months, I am presenting in a major healthcare conference in Basel, feeling super confident and completely with a different mindset of like, if I'm big, I'm gonna use all of this size to like connect with that audience and be seen and be heard. So that's just a little example on like this part of self-awareness and understanding who you are, and working towards a better version of yourself and what truly connects with your heart as your next steps in your career. I think is just an amazing privilege for you to pause everything and just focus on yourself and in your growth. Yeah, it was a very special year for me.
I love that. And it takes it's unusual, right? Because just what you're saying, you don't really do that when you're working. When you're working, you're
No, yeah.
not investing in yourself. You know, you're not thinking
Mhm.
like, how am I going to get better at presenting? How am I? Those are not typical things that even you're encouraged to do in the workplace. And so having that time in an MBA program, 1 or 2 years to do that, absolutely can have these ripple effects across your career to come, certainly. The other thing I want to touch on a bit is kind of the expectations you all had for your MBA versus the reality, what actually came to be, the experiences that you had. And you know, you all, for the most part, it sounds like you all are making some sort of pivot, right? So it's a bit of you're kind of jumping feet first into the unknown. But would love to hear now that you've had a little bit of time of reflection on that experiences. Did it meet your expectations? You know, did you get out what you wanted from the MBA experience? Um, if anyone wants to chime in first, otherwise I'll cold call on you. Just like you were back in the class, I will cold call on you.
Yeah, I'm happy to
Oh,
start.
great. Oh, thanks, Kelsey.
Yeah. Or Lexi, did you want to go? Sorry.
Sorry.
No, you can go.
Okay. So yeah, I've mentioned this a little bit, but so for undergrad, University of Miami was around 10,000 students. So for me, it felt big. I grew up in a small town in Western Massachusetts. So for college, I was like, this is great. I love a big university. But for grad school and for my MBA experience specifically, I think I wanted a little bit more of a focused experience. So that was really what brought my attention to Vanderbilt specifically. It was known for being like a smaller program, more tight-knit, more collaborative. And again, I think that was the experience I was looking for. One of the things that drew me to the program initially was I had joined a webinar very similar to this, again, in the area of COVID. And they had a panel of alumni on, and they had graduated from a myriad of different years and different classes, but they all seemed to kind of know of each other, and had connected some way or another. So that really drew me to it, because there were people who had graduated 5-10 years ago that were still affiliated with the school and affiliated with the program and still wanting to give back. So I think that spoke, levels to me. And I feel like my experience going to Vanderbilt and having that firsthand, I kind of got to dive more into that tight-knit community and really understand what it means to be more collaborative. I think I got to see the difference between having a class size of 10 and having professors who know your name, who talk to you, all throughout campus, who have coffee chats with you, et cetera, and really want you to succeed. And I think, especially in an environment where like an MBA, where it can be intimidating and you can be, at least for me, I was afraid to, raise my hand on the first day of classes and speak up. I think being in that type of tight knit and small environment allowed me to kind of grow and flourish. I think more so than I would have for myself personally at like a larger institution. So I think what surprised me the most is the value that I got out of, choosing to go to such a smaller program and having these like connections and relationships that have kind of continued to grow throughout like my 2 years post grad too. So I think that tight knit connection and how much I've seen it kind of flourish in the years post really is what shocked me for the best.
Yeah, jump on in, Kevin.
I'm smiling because I was just with I remember I have one of my dearest friends who works at Deloitte in LA. I met in my program, and I have a memory of being at like one of the first career conferences. And I'll just back up to say, by virtue of like anyone attending this panel, you are prepared and you're doing the work. But if anyone feels unprepared, I promise you, I was more unprepared, and I didn't. As I said earlier, like the Simon School was like, we think you could get an MBA. And I was like, great, let's get an MBA. And the first year was intense personal growth. And we got through it because of, and I remember this memory of being at the first conference, and my dear friend Madrula was like, you need to go up and talk to Goldman Sachs. You need to go talk to Boston Consulting. I was like, no. And I went in, what surprised me is I went in with an idea, and Beatrice, you spoke to this so beautifully, an idea of like what I was going to do. I was like, you come from sports, you're going to go work at Nike, Adidas, or Under Armour, and that's what it's going to be. And that would have been wonderful. I went into consulting after my MBA program, did not know what consulting was when I started. So stuff like that, just, I would say looking back on it, you don't know what you don't know, and you're going to go into it, and it's going to just broaden your view of what's possible in really big ways. And what you said that I loved was like checking in with what feels right to you, because you're going to get so many inputs on, you should do this, you should do this. And I owe so much to Kelsey. You said the community and the tight-knit community. For my internship, I got an interview with a consulting firm. I had never prepared for a case interview. And a second-year MBA was like, I'm going to teach you how to do a case interview in 3 days. And he did. And I got the job. And so it gives me goosebumps remembering like just the support of your peers is everything. And I have that 10 years later. But what surprised me was just what was possible for me. And I see it still paying dividends now as I'm pursuing a chapter of entrepreneurship. And so I think just, I did not have the expectation that like so much would open up is possibility. And I'm in like the support of the people around me to like make sure I believed that it was possible. The last thing I would say that was so invaluable and has probably still been one of my favorite professional experiences that I crave having it out in the real world was like, I'm sure similar to your programs, you work on these academic teams. And I went in to my first year, and my academic team was 5 people from 5 different countries and 5 different industries. It was like a utopia of collaboration and learning that every single person, I had so much imposter syndrome of like, what am I adding? Like Nikhil came from Goldman Sachs in India, and Sebastian is from Tanzania and worked at Toyota in Tokyo. But that environment helps you see, Beatrice, to your point, like what you have to offer in the space that you take up. And so exceeded my expectations. And I think that in summary, just what's possible for you if you really are willing to fail and dive in and put yourself go up to the table of the company that is intimidating.
I think that's wonderful advice. And one of the through lines there, Catherine, is how impactful the people that you're going to be sitting next to are on your experience, which is probably very different than most candidates' experience as an undergraduate student or even professionally. But business schools do an amazing job of recruiting amazing, diverse talent to their cohorts. And so you're going to be challenged by the people that are sitting next to you that are from totally different parts of the world, that worked in totally different industries. And also to Catherine's point, you're going to be like, oh, I didn't know anything about consulting, or I didn't know anything about, brain management. And all of a sudden they sound super cool. You might have an idea of what you want to do with an MBA. You're going to get to a program and be exposed to many, many different things that are going to be really a wonderful opportunity for you to see all the diversity that's out there for the experiences that you can have. Beatrice or Lexi, anything to add before we move on to the next one?
I think the only thing that I would add, so I had very similar experiences as Catherine and Kelsey, particularly with wanting to find a smaller community and cohort. So I did undergrad at SMU. My journalism program was probably like 30 in our graduating class. We were very tight-knit, very close together, and I really wanted to find that type of support and experience going into my MBA. And Georgia Tech just really out the gate was fulfill kind of those expectations for me, even through the recruiting process, whether it was like, personalized reach outs from the admissions recruiter and things like that. I think being able to find a community and a culture for your program that's right for you is really critical in the success. One of the things that I think I was most surprised about that I was definitely really nervous going into, again, being a pivoter, was a concern that maybe I would already be kind of behind the ball on business classes and business knowledge, and that I would be constantly playing catch up in like those intro finance and intro accounting classes. And so I was really pleasantly surprised to see that Scheller's professors approached those courses with the assumption that everyone has a non-business background and that we were all kind of in it together. And I think that that's also really where that community that Catherine spoke about and Kelsey talked about times into. We also have those academic groups of 5 people, but even more than that, like I remember specifically, there was one time we were studying for a finance test, and me and my friend could not understand a concept. And there were probably 10 of my classmates in a room, each taking turns on the whiteboard, trying to help us understand the concept from like a different angle to make sure that we were all kind of being brought along and all, we're being set up for success. And I think one of my other favorite ones was when we were going through interviews, and this is something that I'm sure everyone else can kind of touch on too, but when you do on-campus recruiting, it can be perceived as awkward because you're all basically sitting there waiting in line to go interview for the same role, right? But again, finding that right culture and how those communities are being built in the programs is so important, because when people would walk out of those interviews, they'd be like, hey, Lexi, watch out for this question. This is going to be a curveball. Make sure you're ready for it. So it was really kind of that idea that was ingrained in us from the beginning, that we're all going to find the job that's right for us. This isn't a competition. We will all find placements. But Career Services really wanted to make sure that we were finding the ones that were right for us. And I think that allowed us to really kind of hold hands and bring everyone together through what can be a pretty stressful recruiting process.
I have something to add, actually, if that's okay. For me, one thing was that is very different that I think is important to share. My expectation in terms of like the return over investment. I don't know if you have like any Latinos in the audience, and it's pretty tough when you're Brazilian reais and you were thinking and considering an organization in Switzerland. Only the exchange rate is already like, wow, how can I afford that? And then it was just a big investment. I had my partner, our 2 cats, entire family moving to a different country with this dream of, wow, maybe after the MBA is going to make sense because I'm going to be able to get a sponsorship. I don't have European visa. So how would that work? It was a big question and a huge expectation for us to actually have a good life post MBA. And I can say that definitely is paying off. Like I secured this job in the middle of last year. So I was still doing the program, and then a lot of organizations went to the campus, and then I applied. So yeah, that was a big expectation that I had, like securing a sponsorship for work in Europe, and that's working. So that's pretty good. So definitely the investment paid off.
I'd love to hear that.
I cannot say that it was already paid off, but it's being paid off. We get there.
Yeah, you're getting there. Yes. And I think that's a great segue. I want to talk a bit about the MBA's impact on career. And a number of you kind of started to touch on this of, obviously doing an MBA might be because you want a specific job, whether it's a complete career pivot or you want to stay in an industry and accelerate. Lots of different ways. You might want to change location, change functions, whatever that might be. There's a lot of different ways you can pivot with an MBA. And earlier, when you mentioned that this is kind of like, this is such an important piece that it can be when you're looking to transform your career. So I'd love to hear from you all about how you feel the MBA has transformed the trajectory of your career. So this idea of, where might you be without an MBA versus where you are now? Do you think, has it changed the trajectory of your career, and to what extent? So I'll leave it kind of open-ended for now, and then we might dive a little bit deeper into that, but would love to hear kind of the effects you feel like it's had on your career specifically. Catherine, I want to pick on you first, partially because I think you might be, at least from what you've told us, the most different pre-MBA to post-MBA.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And yes, starting there, because I also think there's it's so interesting having worked in 3 different places since MBA, because I could have dreamt of working in LA in the entertainment space, but I needed to it wouldn't have happened right after the MBA, which I think is interesting to look back on. But pre-MBA, totally. I was a field hockey coach. What I would be doing without Simon, I don't know. I might be coaching field hockey and writing plays. I don't know. Because the funny thing is, that's too multi-hyphenate, but I'll share it, is I was looking at going to drama school or business school. That's how, it's funny, the University of Rochester for undergrads, you don't have to pick a major. So you end up dabbling in a lot. And that is still me as an adult. But anyways, yeah, it opened up. I would never be where I am without it. For me, I used to articulate it, and it still feels correct. It was a career starter for me versus a career pivot. And so I was they call them early leaders, because I was only a year post undergrad when I came back. And so it was definitely drinking from a fire hose, as I said, all that was possible. So I would say it made everything about my career in the last 8 years possible. I would have never, I took an internship that took me out to San Francisco, and I spent the summer consulting at Levi Strauss, the denim brand. And, I knew I loved retail and loved brands, but it made it possible for me to work in the spaces that I have over the last 8 years. So that's it in a nutshell. It wouldn't have happened without it. And so, but then what I love looking back on is, I trusted the advisory of the Career Center and my peers that opened me up to how valuable consulting was as a first step. And it was you want to have a career in retail and consumer branding. This is an opportunity to get a ton of different experience in a short time. And so that was a wonderful first step. And I then spent 5 years at Walmart building consumer and talent-led brands. And that wouldn't have happened without the consulting. And then pivoting to the media space to be the retail person and the consumer products person in the media company it wouldn't have happened without the consulting, without the Walmart. So what I love is that I find, looking back on my time in the MBA, all those personal passions and interests were present. And it's interesting how they're still present 8 years later, that I found myself in a third industry in a similar function. And so, it's interesting to think about how transformative it was pre-MBA in the athletics world to post-MBA in the retail space, but now how it's allowed me to shape shift to 3 different industries in the past 8 years. So that's what I'll offer.
Yeah, and I think the key there also is it's not about your first job. So
100%.
Yeah, yes, it's about that. I should say it's not my first.
Yeah.
It's not only about your first job, right? It's about every job that you're going to have after you graduate from an MBA. Every single one is going to be influenced by the fact that you've had this experience.
Totally. And if I may, it's a real quick specific story. I was at a big digital consulting firm called Cognizant that's a little bit Deloitte adjacent competitor in certain spaces. And I was on a digital consulting team and my client was Walmart, but I was consulting for the product and engineering org on some programs that they were building for the merchandising business. And so it was interesting. I was in a space with a lot of men in product being their consultant, but interfacing with the women that led the merchandising division. And so what was so funny is they were going to offer me a full-time job in the product org, but their internal client, her name is Shelly Huff, retail, like amazing retail exec. I went to her for advice because I met her in the consulting setting. And I was like, Shelly, they want to offer me a job full-time at Walmart. Like, what do you think of that? And she was like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I really want to build brands. And she was like, well, you should join my team. And so it's just, and I say that to say the MBA, like her awareness of my MBA and my ability to like be in different spaces within Walmart made that possible. And so to your point, exactly, you can't anticipate when the next thing will come up, but that consulting opportunity was the stepping stone that then made like the dream job, if you will, possible for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Catherine. Other thoughts on trajectory? Kelsey, I saw you took yourself off mute. Jump on in.
Yeah. So Catherine had me thinking about this, but so, of course, the MBA had an impact on my career trajectory. The experience, of course, gave me the hard skills that we've talked about, like data analysis, organizational strategy, financial acumen, all of that good stuff. Most of which I mentioned I didn't have before. So obviously honing in on those skills really did help me hone in on a new set of opportunities, a new set of skills. But I think beyond those hard skills, the experience actually gave me a ton of confidence. I think professionally and personally. And I think confidence, especially as women in the workplace professionally, it can be a bit taboo, a bit of a taboo topic. But I will say confidently that my MBA did provide me with the confidence to kind of maybe not know exactly what I'm doing, but be confident in my ability to kind of figure it out. And again, be comfortable in that discomfort. For an example, I used to be really terrified of public speaking. In my previous role prior to business school, I would always make my colleagues speak up in meetings instead of me, or I would find ways to kind of blend into the background. And on my very first day of class at Vanderbilt, I took a public speaking course, and we had to draw a random topic out of a hat and speak on it for 3 minutes in front of about 30 people. Very first day of class. So naturally, I was terrified. But I think that moment specifically, set the tone for how much I would be stretched in my 2 years at school. So 2 years of being in classrooms full of smart, motivated people, again, pushed me out of my comfort zone consistently. I think it made me think more critically. And again, it made me communicate more confidently. And I think embracing those difficult opportunities, I definitely probably would have avoided before. So I think that was like a really helpful component of the experience.
Love that. Yeah. You and Beatrice both touched on that. If you don't think you're good at public speaking, an MBA will make you good at public speaking.
Or at least make you think you're good.
Yeah. I mean, confidence, I feel like is half of it anyway. Lexi, what about you? I know you said journalism, again, kind of a very non-traditional experience before business school. But that was your educational background, so it makes sense. So how do you feel like, or what might you be doing today if you didn't do the MBA?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think I would probably be living, in some small town, maybe still trying to pursue journalism or potentially floundering. I honestly don't know what I would have done because I didn't feel like I would be able to successfully pivot without having the MBA. I really didn't feel like I was going to be setting myself up for success if I just tried to kind of cold turkey cut over into the business world. And so I think that the MBA really set me up for success in kind of what Kelsey was alluding to, like being uncomfortable. So I didn't say this previously, but coming out of Georgia Tech in 2019, I went into AT&T's LDP program. And that's kind of the similar thing as consulting, right? You're learning, you're constantly pivoting between a lot of different things, learning different roles in the organization, different towers in an organization quickly to be able to set up as, a leader. However, I know LDPs always kind of tout that they're for future leaders of companies. But I think having to kind of get back into that mindset of pivoting classes every semester or every few months, things like that, set me up for success to be able to hit the ground running in the same type of environment, but in the real world, when I was pivoting organizations every 10 months, to learn something new, you have to make quick impacts, and being able to pull from my MBA quickly and know how to get those small wins, those types of things. I don't think I would have even had that train of thought or mindset without the MBA. And so I think that was probably my biggest thing. The other part just totally left my head. So I'll leave it there.
And Beatrice, you talked about, obviously coming as an international student, I think if nothing else, there's just the actual barrier to moving to a new place to pursue professional opportunities. So I think you have that wonderful, unique perspective of, moving from Brazil to Switzerland, which is a big jump, culturally as well. But, you had this very technical background, right? You had an engineering experience, you worked at a huge firm. What do you think you might be doing, or how do you feel like the MBA has really impacted that trajectory?
Yeah, I think for me, like as I said before the MBA, I was working in this assignment with commercial strategy, and then I really loved it. I think for me, I would kind of remain in the commercial track of the organization, but I think it will take me longer to reach the positions that I aspire to, because now I'm in this, for example, my rotational program consists in me launching a drug, and then working for market access, working as a key account manager, talking to doctors. So usually when you are in the real world, those roles you need to conclude a cycle, and there's a particular way in the organization for you to get those roles. It's very unusual for you to stay in this role for a year and then move to something completely different. And then, so I think for me, I would still be in one area of the commercial organization, not having this quick and broader exposure, and that's what you want to think about, like being a leader in the organization. You want to navigate through different areas, but that takes time. But then for me, that's what I did, but in supply chain. So I think for me, it would take me longer, so I could get a new exposure in a normal career track, and most likely I wouldn't be able to get a leadership development program. It's something that I didn't have previous experience for in a different region. I'm not even talking about region, definitely. And then plus doing the geographic move, the MBA definitely opened doors.
Yeah, I think there was a question earlier about candidates who want to stay in the same industry, and I think the MBA can kind of help you leapfrog. Can give you the basically the equivalent of significant work experience. So something that might take you 5 or even 10 years to slog through professionally, an MBA can kind of leapfrog you into those positions and move. Sometimes it's moving from technical roles into more strategy roles. So it's moving to actually make decisions about how technical decisions are made. So I think all of those are great potential attributes of the MBA as well. We do have time for a couple audience questions. And so thank you to our audience for submitting a couple of questions here. Oh, someone's asking the question I was going to ask last. So great question, anonymous. I can't give you any credit, but you've asked the question I'm going to ask last. There was a question here about integrating into an industry the question is asking about, maybe an industry that is maybe not as traditionally welcoming to women, or maybe doesn't have as much representation of women. So I'm going to guess, this might be more Lexi. I think typically when we take technology, IT, those things are not typically roles where there's gender parity. Any thoughts, Lexi, on either maybe tools that an MBA helped you when you're integrating? And I don't know that that's your experience, so if it's not, please correct me. Anyone kind of want to touch on the experiences they've had from a gender lens?
I can try to touch on it a little bit. I think AT&T is fairly well balanced. I mean, we've got a lot of male leadership, but there's also been this huge effort really since 2020 to kind of shift the balances and make it more diverse in general, outside of gender as well. So, they actually provide quarterly progress updates on the ratios across our senior leadership teams and things like that. But I think the thing going into a technology industry that's been really, really helpful for me is finding female leadership who can champion me and who can give me coaching on how to approach different things. I think one of the biggest things for me was I'm fairly respectful of rules and laws. So things like managing up to higher leaders was a growth opportunity for me coming out of the MBA program and kind of going through LDP. But being able to lean on and ask in a safe space those strong female leaders that were mentoring me really kind of allowed me to, I think, build my brand, build how I would be a leader in the company, how I would handle difficult conversations that helped me progress significantly, I think, and reinforce that reputation externally when I did get into those situations, because I had someone that I could lean on and I knew I could go to and pretty much ask any questions without judgment. So I think that really helped. I also, going into technology, this was the thing that I forgot, so I'm just going to plug it real quick, but some of the courses, be open to things like data analytics and some of those more technical type courses. I did a data analytics course, but actually in a totally unrelated course, we had a little segment on SQL, and I loved SQL. But going into my first rotation in my LDP program, I actually had to end up using it and learning it myself. But because I had kept my notes, I had remembered and had that opportunity to get a base level learning of SQL, it actually was something that propelled me through and allowed me to have one of those early big wins in my career. So, I think it's easy to kind of want to throw out notebooks, throw out books when you're done with an MBA program because you're like, yay, I'm never touching this again, no more tests. But keeping some of those things that you really think are going to be applicable in the real world experience will allow you to pull on them. And I can't say how valuable it is to have those references early in your career out of an MBA.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Hang on, because I will say, business schools are reactive to what's happening in the market and are somewhat predictive as well. So you're going to be learning things that are happening in real time. So absolutely hang on to those notes in business school. And I think, Lexi, a great thing you brought up is that there's a difference between what might be true in an industry and what's going to be true at a specific company. And I love that you highlighted some of the efforts that AT&T is making, because it's not just about saying, well, this industry means ABC, right? A specific company is potentially going to have a very different culture than the industry that they're a part of. And so I know that that's a really important factor when candidates look at where they want to work. And so thinking about, don't just decide that, oh, I've decided this industry has a certain leaning or is very conservative or, that sort of thing. You're going to find company to company that looks really different. I do want to be conscious of time, and I want to give you all a chance to give your past selves some advice. So thinking back, our audience today is in your past shoes. They would like to be in your shoes going forward. What advice would you give your younger self? Anything you wish you had known, wish somebody had told you? I will take volunteers to go first.
I can jump in.
Hey, Catherine.
I've been thinking a lot about the previous question, and you start just thinking about different experiences you've had over the years. And I remember getting to business school and I was so young and naive. And I was like, what does it mean to be a woman in business? And then I was the president of the women's group at Simon. And now I have 8 years of dynamic experiences out in the workplace. And what I will say is I was reflecting, I found a screenshot of an email I sent my little sister 2 years ago when I first took this job. And it was a man I used to work for giving me feedback that my tone was demanding. And I was like, and so you're going to have all some different sorts of experiences. And so in that, and what I would say to my younger self is pay attention to how you feel. Pay attention to how you feel with people, men, women, it doesn't matter. Trust your gut in any situation and just make sure as you're going through this experience, exploring all the opportunities for yourself, being in all different sorts of academic and practicum and real world experiences, you're your best teacher and you're your best compass. And I feel like 8 years post MBA, I'm really starting to feel the confidence to play with like what I want for my career and for my life, and take bigger risks, hence leaving my job a month ago. And but that applies to anything. So just like trust yourself and know that you know best for yourself. Even if you feel new to it and naive, like it will prove out that like you know best for yourself. So take in the inputs, take in the advice. You're going to take in so much information, but make sure you have the space to listen to you too, is what I would say.
Love that advice.
I-
Kelsey, jump on in.
Yeah, I love that advice too, Catherine. I think that hits the nail on the head. I think imposter syndrome was a really big issue for me. I think it still continues to be, if I'm being candid. I remember my very first day of classes, I took my first finance course, and I called my parents sobbing and was like, I cannot do this. Come pick me up. I'm not supposed to be here. But what I think I've come to realize is that everyone feels that way at some point or another, whether they show it or not. And I think you're never going to be alone in wondering if you're smart enough, if you're experienced enough. And I think ultimately the truth is that like you all bring value simply by being in the room, by being curious, by asking good questions. And I think our perspective and our experience, like that all matters. And I think also being open to other experiences and other perspective also matters. So I think I would kind of tell myself, if I had to give advice, is kind of to stop measuring against everyone around me and instead focus on what I want to contribute, what I want to learn, and ways I want to grow, and the things I want to actually get out of the program. Again, within the year program, the 2-year program, or even beyond. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Great advice. Thank you.
I think the only other thing that I would add is kind of echoing what both of them said, is to really just trust your gut, particularly when it comes to choosing which company is right for you. Just because, I'll use consulting as an example because that's a huge, track that people take out of MBAs. But just because consulting may be right for 60% of your cohort doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for you. And the same thing goes for, like, let's say you are choosing between two companies and one has a better package that they're offering, but maybe the other one is actually the better fit. That actually happened to me, and I chose the one that was a better fit with AT&T, and I'm so happy that I did. So I think what Catherine said previously, I think Kelsey did too, about listening to yourself, trusting your gut, like you are going to have to live the life that you're choosing coming out of MBA, and so make that path for you and choose what you want and what makes the most sense for you, for your family, everything that's going to impact you moving forward, because that will also help accelerate your career when you're thriving in an environment that makes sense and is right for you.
Beatrice, final advice for us.
I think for me is embracing discomfort. Like the biggest like growth moments from my MBA journey was when I decided to embrace discomfort, and I would have given my younger self this advice sooner, to start embracing discomfort for growth, because it feels weird, but it feels good after. But I think also very related to what the lady said about knowing yourself. I remember the year before I decided that I was doing my MBA. I was feeling so uncomfortable too. About, is that the right thing? But it just felt right. But so for me, the thing about connecting with yourself, if you feel that thing in your body that is like excitement, but also you're afraid of it, just go for it. Because what's the worst that can happen, right? So yeah, that would be my advice for myself younger.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Wonderful advice. All great things. I really appreciate you all being here with us today and sharing your perspective. It was my absolute pleasure to moderate this conversation. You all made it super easy. You had wonderful things to say. And I want to thank our amazing business school partners today for making the webinar possible, who did an amazing job of bringing us representatives of what an MBA can do for you professionally. If you all have any questions, if we didn't get to your question, feel free to send us a note. We are more than happy to help. I want to give a big thank you again to our panelists today. Thank you to our audience